Hello and welcome. So this is my session in Ableton and I'm going to take you through it and show you how exactly I work. Right? First and foremost, I'm not going to be playing the original vocals and some of the samples because I don't want to be sued for copyright on YouTube. But I will leave the link to the song down in the description so you can go and check it out. Okay, starting on. Let me play you the groove first, then step by step I will explain what I've done and how I've done, and I hope that will help you guys. Here's the song. So what I try to do here is I try to get that classic house kind of a feel. So let me start by showing you guys the FX tracks. I have 3 FX tracks, 2 for the reverb and 1 for the delay. One reverb is for the drums and I'm using Valhalla Room reverb for this, and I'm using Tiled Room preset for it, followed by the channel EQ. By the way, I'm using 10.1 beta of Ableton Live and it's an amazing program. I think it's just too cool, and this has become one of my favorite devices in Ableton 10.1. Alright, moving ahead, for the synth reverb I have Valhalla Room again, followed by the channel EQ cutting of the lows, and for the delay FX track I'm using Ableton's Echo device. And over here I have a sidechain track. In this I have a simpler which has just a closed hi-hat. Right? Okay, so now let me take you in depth of what I've done and how I've worked on this particular track. First let me show you the kick and the bass. I have kick here. The pattern is just normal 4 on the floor. And you can see there are 2 kicks actually. Here in the drum rack there are 2 kicks, right? One is the kick and one is the layer. So let me mute the layer and just play you the kick. So this is the kick without the layer and this is with the layer. The layer is nothing but a closed hi-hat in a simpler with no release, no sustain, just a little bit of decay. This is how it sounds. And with the kick. So when I was mixing the track, I couldn't actually get the kick to cut through the mix more. So I thought of adding a layer on top of it. So after the drum rack, I have a utility device to mono the kick. I always mono my kicks and my bass. After that I have a channel EQ device to tame a bit of mids and a little bit of highs. After that I have EQ 8 to cut off the low ends and the high mids a bit. Let me play you the kick without these 2 EQs, right? Now one by one I'm going to switch on the EQ devices and I'm going to show you the difference. Now with the EQ, channel EQ device, you hear the boxiness towards the low mids section. And the EQ8 is helping even more in this mix by cutting the low ends and the high mids. Just check it out. Much cleaner. Let's move on to the bass section. This is what the pattern looks like and this is what it sounds like. Right? And for the bass I'm using Spectrasonic Trillion VST and a preset called Clicky Solid Saw. I also have 2 MIDI devices here. One is the pitch and one is the velocity. Velocity to keep all the notes to the 100% and the pitch to push the notes 2 octaves up. So after that I have a utility device to make the bass mono and then EQ to actually control the frequencies. Let me play you the bass without this EQ. Now with the EQ, the difference is huge. Right, now let's hear it without this EQ and with the kick. Now with the EQ on and with the kick, much better, much better, much better. So now these two tracks, the bass and the kick, I have grouped them and put them into this track, and I'm calling them kick and bass, right? And in this, I've not done anything major. I'm just trying to control the levels which are coming in, and then it's going into this glue compressor. My usual settings for the bus compression is slow attack, fast release. That's it. Now this is with the compressor on, and this is without, and makes them sound like one. Now moving on to the perks section, I have two sounds, conga and bongo. The conga is I've taken from the Ableton stock sound, and so is the bongo, same from Ableton stock sound. In the bongo, nothing major processing happening here. I've just added a little bit of compression to make it stand out in the mix. Let me show you the pattern that is playing. This is the conga. This is the bongo. Right? And if I select both the patterns, right? This is the conga. You can see on the left when I select the track here up. Now I'll select the bongo. Right? So conga and bongo. So that's the pattern. Again, I'm putting them in a group. So usually my way of working is I put the sounds together, I get a right balance for them. I do not do much processing. I do it only if it's needed. And then I put them into a group track, and then over there in that group track I will process them. Here I have a channel EQ cutting off the low mids, lows, and boosting just a little bit of highs. Now let me play you the percussions. Let me solo that, and let me play you the percussions without this channel EQ. You hear that low, mids and lows? If I play the percussions with the kick and bass without this EQ, you'll know what I mean. See how these percussions are trying to fight for that space in the mix, clashing on the low ends and low mids. Now with the EQ, now the bass has its own space, and so does these perks. And after that I have some sidechain going on. Right, moving on to the perks and the loop group. I have, like I explained earlier, I have these open hats. Let me open this group. In this I have 3 hi-hats. Let me show you the first one. So here I'm using a loop inside a simpler, and what I've done is I've selected the slice mode of the simpler and selected only this particular hi-hat to play. The second track has a simpler with an open hi-hat on it, and I've layered them together and sounds like this. Now without the hi-hat 2, now with the hi-hat 2, sounds much better. The third one is also a hi-hat, and in this I'm using an EQ8 to roll off the mids and the low ends and boost a little bit of high mids over here, and it sounds like this. That's without the third one. See, the effect is very subtle, but it's there, it's needed. So these 3 hi-hats go into the high perk group. So now over here I have an EQ8 which is rolling off the low ends. I've pushed down the high mids and cut off the highs a bit. So it sounds like this. Now let me play you without the EQ8. Hear the difference? So this is what I was trying to tell you guys earlier. So what you need to do is get your sounds together inside of a group track. Get the balance right first. Don't process it until and unless if it's really needed. And then put them in a group, and in that group together process them like this. Okay, so moving on to the loop track. In this I'm using 2 loops, loop 1, loop 2 and a shaker. So loop 1 is a section of one loop, beginning section of one loop, and I'm doing the same with the second loop. So the first loop sounds like this. And in this track I have no processing. I have a compressor which is bypassed. Let me delete it. Actually don't need it. Loop 2, what I've done is I am processing the loop 2 here with an EQ8, cutting off the lows completely here, and also a lot of mids are gone off from here. Now let me play the loop first. Now the loop 2 along with it. Now loop 2, let me play you this second track without this EQ, so you'll know what I've actually done here. You see that high mids actually disturbing. With the EQ it sounds so much cleaner, right? Moving on to the next sound. It's a shaker. It's a sample of a shaker in a simpler, and the pattern is very simple with some velocity differences happening here. And if you hear it with the loop, and now if you hear all of them together, the percussions and the kick and the bass. So these loops go inside this track here, and I'm processing it furthermore with the channel EQ, cutting off the lows, the mids and the highs over here. Now let me play you the loops without this channel EQ. Now with the channel EQ. See, I told you this is a very powerful device. And some sidechain. Now in this entire track, if I play the drums and the kick and bass. Now let me bypass this channel EQ on the loops and play it. Makes a lot of difference. And then I also have some sidechain happening here. Okay, let's move ahead. And let me show you the next track that I've actually processed quite a bit, and that is this one, snare and clap. So the first one is just a clap track with a clap sample, and I've layered it with a snare with a channel EQ, cutting off just a little bit of high mids. This is the snare without the channel EQ. Yeah, there is a difference. So if I play them now together, they sound like that. So now what is happening is I've sent these two into this group, and over here what I'm trying to do is trying to achieve that sound from the 80s called gated reverb. So to achieve that 80s gated reverb sound, I've added a reverb with a long decay. You can see around 12 seconds, followed by the gate. So what is actually happening, the decay tail is really long, right? Let me play you with the kick and bass. I can't have such a long reverb tail. So to control that, I've added the gate, which cuts off the tail and keeps the snare and clap very rhythmic inside the groove. See how it shuts off the tail. And I still have the reverb sound. Now if you hear it with the entire track. Now if I bypass the reverb, See how the clap and the snare, the sound just dies off immediately. I wanted some body of the snare and the clap. So for that I've added the reverb. I hope you guys are understanding what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so after that I have an EQ8 to cut off the unwanted low ends, to cut off the mids and some high mids over here. So we're done with that part. Now let me show you the FX and the fills. Now for the fills I have 3 fills running, right? So this is the first one. So this is the first one. Just let me solo the fills. First one is this. The second one is this. So what I've done is I've taken a sample and cut it into pieces and just shuffled the pieces here and there to make my own fill. That's what I've tried to do. I think I've done the same here. Yeah, I've chopped the slices here and there to make my own fill. Okay, so these 3 tracks are going into this group called fills, and there's no processing happening over here. Now let me take you to the FX channel. The main sound over here is this. Right, it's a riser, and I'm using an analog device for this. I'm using both the oscillator on saw wave and the noise oscillator with a little color on it, bright color on it. The pattern that I've made over here is a chord, right, a B major chord. Okay, after that I have a pitch modulation going up. Right, it's going up 1 octave up, 12 semitones up. But what is actually complementing the pitch bend here is the automation of the auto filter here. Let me just show you that. So that's what the automation of the auto filter is doing there, just rising up, and I'm just cutting it off right here because the fill over here is playing. So if I play you this along with this fill over here, it sounds like this. Just before the fill is complete, the FX ends over here. After that, in the FX track, I have a channel EQ to roll off the unwanted lows. Moving on ahead, I've used the same sound, the same clip over here with no pitch modulation whatsoever. And what I've done over here is, out of the 3 notes, I've muted the lowest note over here. So what I've done is, in this particular section, I've added a different automation of auto filter over here. Let me show you. Yeah. And it repeats over here. So it's the same sound of analog with some noise with automation on the auto filter. There's one more section, which is this, which is the main one. Let me play you the part first. So for this sound, I'm using a wavetable synth, and I'm using only 1 oscillator of it. But the main color is coming because of the auto filter. So the auto filter is opening up, the cutoff frequency is opening up over here in the automation. But the wobble that you hear, which is happening because of this LFO section over here, which is synced to our tempo but is running on the triplet note. Right? Followed by the overdrive. Now if I play this same section without the overdrive, it will just die. It sounds good, but it doesn't have that life. It doesn't have that high end to cut through the mix. You see, I have a fill running again over here on top. So if I remove the overdrive from this section, in the mix it will not be noticed at all. So to make it stand out, I'm using this overdrive device. Then other things in the FX tracks are the regular crashes and the reverse crashes. So I've layered the crashes here, pan them left and right, and then I've grouped them together and put some effects on it, some reverb and some delay. In the group, what I'm doing is I'm rolling off some low ends, unwanted low ends, using this channel EQ and some sidechain on it. Very subtle, very little sidechain. So now that we are done with the FX, let me tell you, this entire portion of drums, the percussion loops, the perks, the kick and the bass, they're going into this group, one group, and even the snare and clap are going into this group called filter. That's because there's this filter section which comes when I introduce the song. So what I've done is I've sent them into this group and I've just added an auto filter into this. I've just selected the frequency and automated the on off switch of the device here. That's it. You see, device on. So this gives that proper classic house feel to this track. And when the track is filtered, I'm using these claps which just come whenever this track is getting filtered. No processing whatsoever, it's just one sample inside the sampler. This is what it sounds like, and that same happens over here. Right? Okay, so moving on from here, now let me show you the synth section. I have two groups over here of stabs and two separate tracks of stabs as well. So for the first main stab, I'm using a VST called VPS Avenger. I'm sure you guys must have heard of it. What I do in my tracks where I'm programming the chords or the pads and everything, what I do is in those tracks I add the chord device followed by the scale, and in that I just do the settings, and in the clip all I do is just draw one note. The rest is done by the MIDI devices. So here's the pattern. Let me solo it. And in this track I'm using VPS Avenger. The preset is plugged fully charged. After that I have a channel EQ cutting off the lows, the mids, and cutting off a little bit of highs. Now followed by the other tracks here called Stabs 1. In that I have a VST called Expand 2. If you've not heard of this, I'm telling you, please go and get this. It's worth it no matter what. If you don't have Spectrasonics Omnisphere 2, this is a great alternative to it. See the amount of sounds it has. And it's dirt cheap on Plugin Boutique. Most of the time, the entire year, this plugin is on sale, and at times you may even end up getting it for $1. Alright, so I'm using one preset called All Purpose Stack over here for it. Track 1. For track 2, again I'm using Expand 2 with a different preset called Super Smooth. So the first one sounds like this. The second one sounds like this. Together they sound like this. Right? In the third track I'm using Poly. This is a stock Ableton device, and all I'm doing over here is using the saw wave with some noise and some chorus, and it sounds like this. So together they sound like this. Mind you, they're playing the same pattern of this, the main stab track. Nearly the same pattern, not same pattern, nearly the same. So if I solo them together, right, so they sound like that. And I send them into this particular group called Stabs 1, and in this I'm processing it with only channel EQ, cutting off the lows and boosting just a bit of mids. Now let me play you without the EQ. Very subtle change, but it's there. It's happening. Okay, moving on to the other set of stabs. I'm using Expand 2 again, a sharp brass preset. The second track I'm using a Nexus. So let me first play you the first track and show you the pattern. Again, what I'm trying to do is just insert one note and let the MIDI devices do the rest for you. So this is track 1 of Expand 2. Same pattern is being played here by the next track, and it's a Nexus. And the preset is I'm using over here is LD Classic JP Leader 1. Right, so together they sound like this. Yeah. The third track I'm using a wavetable synth. In this I'm using only one oscillator and little bit of filter modulation happening. The envelope 2 is modulating the filter 2. So together they sound like this. So this pattern is playing only alternatively, right? So all these 3 tracks go into this particular track, and again I'm controlling it with the channel EQ by cutting off the low ends, the mids and the highs a bit, alright? And the last track in this group is called Stabs 3, and for this I'm using wavetable synth again. I'm using 2 oscillators where I'm modulating the wavetable position and the filter modulation, right? Followed by the channel EQ to cut off the lows and the mids. So the entire track, everything over here, it goes into this one track called All Stabs, and in this I'm doing the major processing with some saturation, with glue compressor and the channel EQ. Let me bypass all these guys and play you the track. You'll understand what I'm saying. See, it's so quiet, no life. So I'm adding some saturation here without any color. Right? After that, I'm adding glue compressor after this. So this is my basic setting, like I said earlier, slow attack, fast release. But the different thing I'm doing here is actually pushing the makeup gain out so I can get some soft clip happening. So if I play you without the compressor, now with the compressor, you see that plucky sound, that the transient actually cutting through. It's because of this soft clipping. And after that I'm adding a channel EQ to control the lows, the mids and the highs a bit. And with the mix it sounds like this. What if I bypass all these 3 inside the mix and play? Alright, moving on to the next track called Synths. In this section I have something called Brass Tabs, and for the Brass Tabs I'm using VPS Avenger, a preset sample called Latino Trumpets. With a groove it sounds like this. Right? No processing happening inside the track. And the other track in this group is the Art track. Again I'm using the VPS Avenger for this, I guess. Yes, I'm using VPS Avenger. It's a preset called Cine Bass Atmo. If I solo it, the internal arpeggiator is doing its thing there. After that I have a channel EQ rolling off the unwanted mids, the lows and the highs, and just a subtle panning is happening with the auto pan over here. Let me play you with the track. And they both are going into this group track where no processing is happening. It was not needed. Okay, then moving on to this instruments track, I'm using strings, a group called Strings, and in this I have 3 tracks grouped. One is string 1 and for this I'm using Synth Master 1 plugin, and the sound of the preset is like this. And the second track I'm using Nexus, and the preset is Hybrid String 2, and it sounds like this, right? And I've layered both of them with a noise, and for the noise I'm using analog, just the noise oscillator, color right on top, bright. Okay, and it sounds like this. Without the noise, with the noise, and they all going into this group where I'm using EQ3 to cut off the lows and the highs, and some sidechain happening here. Now the reason I've put this pattern here, because this track is just coming out of that filter thing and it's going full on with this portion. Just let me play the filter section going into this groove. Yeah, it's okay, it sounds nice, it's okay, but it's not wow, it's not there, you know. I felt there was something missing there, so I added these sounds over here. So now let's hear it with the strings. See the difference? Okay, moving on to the string 2 track. This is what it sounds like. And what I've done is I've used 2 notes, one on top of the other on the octave, one octave up. So if I'm playing A, so I'm playing A on top of it. Same with C sharp, D sharp again, right? So for this sound I'm using violin section, which is a stock sound of Ableton Live. Over here I'm using again violin section and strings ensemble for the third sound. Same pattern, all 3 of them are playing the same pattern. And then they are going into this track where I'm not processing them at all. Okay. And now the last track in the session is this. It's called the filler synth. It's not a synth actually, it's a cello sound. In this I'm playing 2 same notes, one lower and one higher. This is what I mean. Lower B and higher B. Just to make it thick, make it sound big, right? And it sounds like this. With the track it sounds like this. You see how this particular sound actually complements this one. Sorry. So when this is filtering off, see how this comes in to complement the entire track. So if you hear it, get that? So that's it from me in this tutorial. See you guys in the next one. Cheers.